I really found myself with a mixed identity. I grew up in a mainstream situation. I went to oral school. I also went to the residential school. And for the longest time, I didn't know really where I fit. And I developed quite a bias, quite frankly, a negative bias against the residential school. I guess this probably depends on each region. Perhaps in the States, my opinion would be different if I was in Indiana or California or someplace where they have really strong schools for the deaf with lots of deaf role models. But I didn't find that in the school as I was growing up. There were so many hearing adults and not many deaf adult role models. So I didn't know really who I was. I was pretty embarrassed about being deaf. And I didn't want to look stupid. I wanted to look bright. So I thought, well, I'll go to a mainstream situation. Well, that all changed when I went to Gallaudet. My eyes were really opened. And I began to realize what it meant to be deaf. One day in the cafeteria there at Gallaudet, there was a table of kids sitting around, and they were all from residential schools. And I sat down, and they were talking in ASL and all about their experiences growing up and how they had a good time playing sports and this and that. And I realized I didn't have that. And then suddenly they all looked at me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, from British Columbia. I was mainstream growing up." And they started picking on me and giving me a hard time and calling me names. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then I realized it's because I didn't have that sense of a value of the language and the culture. I know that when I took my master's degree, I still wasn't really comfortable with my identity as a deaf woman. And there was a seminar about deaf culture and deaf education and things like that. And there was this class I took in that seminar, and the man teaching it was hearing, but he used sign language, and he began to see something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. He said, "You have beautiful language." And he started asking me about my background, and I was embarrassed to tell him I hadn't grown up in a residential school for that many years. And he said, "You should come and work at Delaware at the School for the Deaf and be involved in our storytelling program with deaf children." And I thought, well, there's no way I can do that. And he said, "Yes, you can. You've got it. You've got a deaf soul in there." And so I went and started working with the preschool children, and I realized that I did. I had the language. I had the culture. And the children started signing like me and mimicking my visual behaviors and using the classifiers that I was using. And I saw myself in them and began to realize it was okay to be deaf. I found myself. I'm a deaf person. That was an eye-opening experience. Then I went to India, and I went to the School for the Deaf there. And of course, I'm Indian in appearance, but they were Indian in every other way. They dressed according to the culture. They ate Indian foods. They did all these things that I was not that familiar with. And so the fact that I began to eat with them and dress like them, I began to find my Indian culture, and we had a really wonderful bonding experience. And while I had felt a bond with deaf people, I realized that with deaf Indian people, I had a whole different relationship. Even the value for little things like jewelry and things like that. And they were amazed to meet an adult person who was deaf and Indian. So that forced me to look within myself and realize that I wasn't just deaf, I wasn't just a woman. I was also Indian. And then I began to use English in a written form and ASL and teach them how to read and write in their own language. And it was an amazing give and take experience for all of us. It was thrilling and profound. The externals, the food, the clothes, that's important, but the language, the culture, that's the heart of it. And I began to really realize hey, everybody else here looks like me. We all have brown faces in this place. And it was a really different experience. I didn't have that connection with all of my white deaf friends.